The floor is yours, Dr. Möller.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I'm delighted to have a chance to meet you. And start out by contradicting you by saying that I'm not a hero. I was an ordinary man. And what I did was, I did because it had to be done. And I think many people have asked me, oh, weren't you scared under the circumstances? Yes, of course we were scared. We were all scared. But we didn't show it, because to do what we had to do, you can't show that you are afraid or worried, because the people who were involved, the Jewish people who were being threatened, they were scared. I had a good reason. But I didn't. My job was to help people. Anyway, I'm getting into my story a bit, but I'm terribly pleased and honored to be here, and a wonderful chance to meet you people. I've been here a long time in Canada, but what I'm talking about now is what happened to me and other people during the war. Do any of you know Denmark? Do you know what Denmark is?
Yeah.
You do?
Shall we flash it on the map? I have a map.
Well, I don't know. It's a Scandinavian country. But when people say, what's Denmark? It's a very small country. It's a very happy country. It's a very beautiful country. It's a country that has been independent for thousands of years, and certainly in terms of European history, the last 300 or 400 years of the time when I lived there. A lot of people have thought of Denmark as something just brush aside. What is it anyway? Oh, there's a little peninsula on top of Germany. Well, should it really be a country, some people say? Well, it has been for a very long time. One reason why it became a country was that the Romans, when they came up through Europe, France and Germany, they came to the border and said, these people are barbarians. We don't want to have anything to do with them. And actually, the strange thing is that the Romans left Denmark alone. And so did the successors. Charlemagne, the big French-German leader, he really only got to the border and never penetrated north of there. So it's a country with some strong belief in independence. It's a country that has never had a revolution. We've had some upsets here and there, but on the whole there's a stability to the country that is quite unique, even today. I was 25 years old when this particular event that I'm talking about happened. Well, a few years before, in 1940, the Nazis occupied Denmark and Norway in a flash. It was an absolute horror. And I remember myself, my mother coming into my bedroom and saying, they're here. I couldn't believe it. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. We didn't expect it. We hardly believed it. There were low-flying bombers over the roofs of the house, and of course there were soldiers marching through the main street where we lived. This was an incredible shock, and naive perhaps, because Denmark always had this tradition of thinking that the British would help us, while they had other things to do. And when the Nazis occupied Denmark, the Danish government, of course, protested, and they said we put 3 conditions to your being here. Well, we came to save you. Well, never mind, we said. We insist that you not enroll Danish soldiers into your Eastern Army on the Eastern Front. We insist that you don't interfere with internal affairs in the country. We insist that you don't touch the Jewish population because the Jews in Denmark are Danish and you are not touching us. Oh yeah, they agreed to that, and the country relaxed, and there was a period of quiet and calm, and but puzzlement. We didn't really quite know why would Nazi Germany occupy Denmark. Well, there was a very good reason in that they wanted to protect the front there against the British. And the second thing, they had a need for food. Denmark is of course, even today, a producer of agricultural products. It's a very rich country in the sense the soil is very healthy, and there's a long tradition of products of eggs, butter, and cookies. You know, you can buy Danish cookies down the street here, butter cookies. So, so I should say then, shortly after, within a year, I think Himmler, the head of the German Gestapo, came to Copenhagen and interviewed the chief of police in Copenhagen. And he said, you have a problem of Jewish people in this country. And Tune Jacobsen, the chief of police, said, we don't have a problem. The Jewish people are Danish people. What are you talking about? Well, absolutely, consistently, the Danish government insisted that there is no Jewish problem. There are Jews in Denmark, but there are many other people in Denmark, and they're all Danes. And we absolutely refused to even accept that there was a problem of any sort. Well, it enraged, of course, the Nazis, and at one time the Minister of External Affairs in Denmark went to a signing of the Anti-Comintern Pact, which was a pact against a military pact against the Soviets. And that disturbed us a great deal because he had been asked, he had met Hitler, and Hitler had brought up with him the issue of problem in Denmark with the Jews. And he insisted there's no problem. We have Jews in Denmark, we have, but they're all Danes. Anyway, more and more, then there was a tension between the military and the political, the SS people. And I'm sure you know what the SS means. Are you all familiar with this term? The SS are the sort of a police force that was very strongly involved in the persecution of the anti-Semitism and the persecution of Jews and destruction of Jewish businesses in Germany and so on. Anyway, the army troops were replaced by SS. So there was a senior SS person, Dr. Best, who became the head of the Nazi presence in Denmark. And he continued to bring up these old problems. I won't go into all the details of that, because there was a naivety in Denmark, a trust that nothing could go wrong, that it began to wear down. And more, the Gestapo, the German police, zeroed in on the Jewish community. They insisted on getting a list of all the list of names and addresses of Jewish people in Copenhagen. And the archivist in the Jewish center said, we haven't got a list. They had just actually been forewarned and sent it to the National Archives. And the Gestapo didn't go after it at the National Archives. So more and more the pressure came, and there was anti-Semitism occurring with some Danish people involved, and they were immediately brought to court and very severely punished by the Danish court system, because anti-Semitism is illegal in Denmark. You cannot, and could not at that time, nor could you today, express anything like anti-Semitism. They were simply against the law. Now, at that time, there was, we're now down to 1943. I was 25 years old, studying at the university, and more involved in some moderate resistance movement against the Nazis. And but we began to realize that they meant business, and they were going to zero in on the Jewish population in Denmark. How many Jews were there in Denmark at the time? There were about 6,500, between 6,500 and 7,000 people who declared themselves as Jewish and who were Orthodox and or who had connection with the Jewish community and the synagogues. We began to realize that Gestapo was going to zero in, and what we found out was that they were going to capture all the Danish Jews and send them to concentration camps in Germany. The interesting thing was, it was very little talked about, and it was kept very hidden, if you like. But we got news from the trade commissioner in the German embassy, Duckwitz. He leaked the information to us that they intended on October the 1st, 1943, to capture all the Jews and transport them down to Germany. They, a few days before, the Danish harbor was full of transport ships, and apparently Duckwitz was perfectly right. It's to this day a miracle to me that Duckwitz had the courage to do what he did, because he was a member of the German embassy. And that I never quite fully understood. Anyway, what we realized, the only thing we could do was to warn all the Jewish people that we knew. So for a week, we all got awfully busy, and the university was the center of it, and the students there. But also a lot of other people began to realize that they really meant business, and that the Gestapo was going to zero in and arrest all the Jewish people. So what we did then, we got the names and addresses of Jewish people we knew and Jewish people we didn't know, and warned them and said, go into hiding, because in a couple of days, Gestapo is going to come. The interesting thing was that there was a group of prominent lawyers, Jewish lawyers in Copenhagen, who were in charge of the Jewish community there. Not the synagogue, but the Jewish community, sort of business community. One of them is called Henricus. Henricus is a Portuguese Jewish name, which you still find in Spain or Portugal. And he was the head of this group, and some Danish politicians went to see him one evening late and said, listen, they are going to do it. And he said, you're lying. I don't believe it. The Danish government will never allow this to happen. There was this attitude among the Jewish population in Denmark that the Danish government would always protect them, as they always had, and the king would always protect them, as they always had. Talking about the king, I should just mention the episode that is often mentioned was that he was wearing the yellow star, which is not true. The king was an extraordinary military type of figure. He was a bit reserved. I actually knew him. I had a chance to talk to him at the university. And he would ride through the streets in Copenhagen every day, without escort. He was a horse enthusiast, but he would ride through the streets in full uniform and say hello to all of us, including me, and a lot of other people. And I have Jewish friends here in Montreal who remember how they greeted King Christian when he rode through the streets. So the Dr. Best, he insisted that the king wear the yellow star. And he insisted that all the Jewish people should wear the yellow stars, so you knew who they were and where they were. And the king protested and said, if you insist on that, I and my family will all wear the yellow star. That was the type of stubborn person he was. He was also a symbol of resistance, a symbol of unity. And at one time, Dr. Best insisted that they raise a swastika on top of his castle. The castle is in the center of Copenhagen. It's still there, Amalienborg Castle. And King Christian said, if you insist on that, there will be a soldier taking the flag down immediately when it's been put up there. And that soldier will be me. So that was these type of responses that you got from the king, who represented sort of a symbol of unity. And Henricus and the other members of the Jewish business community trusted the government, trusted the king, and said he will help us. He will never do it here. This was, of course, very disappointing for us that they responded that way and saying to the politicians who came to see Henricus in his home, you are lying. Of course, within a couple of days, it was only too clear that we were not lying, and we knew what was happening. So the response in the whole Danish community was, we must help the Jewish people to hide. I remember myself coming home from university one day, I lived in Copenhagen, and the apartment we had, quite comfortable but moderately priced apartment on Vesterbrogade, and all the rooms were full. Oh, I realized that they had responded to the warning, and they came and stayed with us. And that happened all over the place.
How many?
Well, I don't know how many there were in our apartment or in our...
In your apartment?
Oh, there must have been some 20, 25 people, of people we knew and people we were related to, because my family is intermarried with Jewish people. My brother was, and my mother was, my mother's sister was, and so on. So there was about 24, 25 people. Also people I know from my academic work at the university. And of course, this was the initial response to the horrible threat that they actually were going to deport all the Danish Jews down to concentration camps. So we felt the only thing we could do would be to hide them and then think on how we could help them get out. Now, the thing that's interesting, I think, about this is today that there was an immediate response of horror, there was a unanimous, spontaneous response that we should and had to help people. There was not a plan, it was all improvised, and it worked because there was a sort of unity, respect, mutual respect for people. There was another thing that was interesting, that the bishop of in Copenhagen was the bishop of the church, which in Denmark is basically a Lutheran Protestant church. He sent out that Sunday morning, at the beginning of October, an edict that was to be read from all the pulpits and all the churches in Denmark, deploring the action against the Jewish people and describing it as inconsistent with our Christian values, and we need to fight for the freedom of these people, which we cherish, the freedom that we all have, and we will fight with our lives to protest and protect the Danish Jews. This was unanimous. This was over the whole country, and it was read from the pulpit. I often wonder what has happened if something like this had been read from the church pulpits in other countries in Europe, deploring the action. Now we had made an effort, surprising or very successful effort, to hide people. What are we going to do then? Well, luckily, the External Affairs Minister of Sweden in Stockholm at that time sent a message to Denmark that they would accept Jewish refugees. The Swedish involvement in the war was sort of a bit iffy, and we had reservations in Denmark because the Swedes seemed to be cooperating a little too much with the Nazi regime, and certainly they provided steel for their armament, and they allowed transport through the Sweden of Norwegian political prisoners, and we really hated that. But at that time, towards in 1943, the Swedes really turned around and said, we will take them. This, of course, was an incredible relief. And what happened then was that we were able to solicit the help of the fishing fleet, the fleet of fishermen who, and I remember as a child every morning living in Copenhagen, which is sort of near the harbor, you hear these little boats going out for herring fishing. And this was sort of a part of the scene. And they go out very early, and we contacted them. When I say we, I should say there was not an organized, it wasn't an organized operation. It wasn't a planned operation. It was totally improvised. And from one day to the next, frankly, we didn't know what we could do, what we should do. So the first thing was to get the fishermen to agree to take the refugees, the Jewish refugees, during the night and set out in the early morning. They always start before sunrise and go out to the fishing banks. And instead of going out fishing, they would have Jewish refugees in the boats and go over to the Swedish coast, which is not far from Denmark. If you don't know the geography, Denmark is this little peninsula and a couple of islands, and then Sweden is this huge country, but with a fairly narrow belt of water in between. The getting people from their hiding in the apartments and houses all over Denmark into the fishing boat is another issue. The Gestapo was watching, and there was undoubtedly a risk involved. And what we did was we got help from all kinds of people. We took taxis, and how could we pay for the taxis? We always got money from anonymous people. I was walking down the street in Copenhagen one day. Somebody came up to me and said, "I think you need money." I say, "What?" "Well, here's $500, here's $1,000. No question asked.
No receipts?
And at one time, I had, the only way I was known in the underground, in the resistance movement, was having a pipe in my mouth. At that time, I smoked a pipe. And that seemed to be a signal that they could trust me. There was obviously risks involved. So we got people into streetcars, into taxis, on bicycles, and whatever we could to get people off. Now, for a while, from Copenhagen itself, where most of the Jewish people were, it was too dangerous. There were too many transports there. It was too easy for Gestapo to discover them. So we spread out during the south of Copenhagen to the islands there, and even up to Jutland. But Jutland is a bit too far. And you realize in October in Denmark the weather is not very pleasant. It's cold and windy and rainy and absolutely awful. And so it wasn't a pleasant ride. I couldn't begin to tell you all the details of how we got all the people over, and so many people. There were some mishaps, there were some shooting, there were some fights, there was a couple of the boats that sank or got into water troubles and so on, and all kinds of efforts were, of course, made to make it reasonably comfortable. But one way of hiding people would be to put the Jewish refugees into the bottom of the fishing boat and put ice over them, because that's what you do when you go out fishing, you have ice. And that's not very pleasant. But as soon as they were over the midline between Denmark and Sweden, they got up. So at one time, Gestapo came to one of these fishing boats and spotted it and approached it. And so the captain, there was a child on board the ship, and the child started crying. And the captain immediately put the steam whistle on and make a god-awful sound, far worse than the crying of the child. So there were all kinds of little inventive ways of getting by and transporting the people over there. Now, some people were, of course, all of the Jewish friends of ours were nervous, and no wonder. They were. There were some people who had heart attacks. There were some prominent people, and a prominent actor, author, who died in Sweden when he got over there. And this, of course, was a terrible, shocking and frightening event in every way. And what happened was about 7,500 Jews were actually rescued and sent over to Sweden. Unfortunately, because of an informer who squealed on some information, some Jewish people were captured in one group of people in an old people's home that we had not identified, and other people who were being discovered. For instance, there were some people who were hiding in a church loft and waiting to be transported over. And 460 people were caught by Gestapo and were sent by ship down to Germany and were put in concentration camp in the Theresienstadt. Terezin, as it's called, it's a concentration camp in the Czech Republic. What happened then? Immediately, at that time, the government of Denmark had resigned in protest to all these activities, to the Gestapo capture of the Jews. So as soon as the 460 people were shipped down to Theresienstadt, the Deputy Minister of External Affairs started a campaign of bureaucratic activities. He sent requests, printed forms with rubber stamps on, saying, we insist you have taken away 460 Danish people and sent them to the Theresienstadt, and we strongly protest. Now we want to know exactly who is there, their names, their health, the food they get, and we want weekly reports about their well-being. And believe it or not, Gestapo responded. Yes, they sent the forms back, filled in the forms, put rubber stamps on, and it became such a bureaucratic type of game that was conducted. And I should say there were some people who passed away of the 460 people. They were old people, and of course it wasn't a picnic. But it is a fact that not a single Danish Jew ever went to the death camp. Not a single one was sent to the Auschwitz or the death camp. They all eventually came back to Denmark with the rabbi and well rescued, by the way, by the Swedish Red Cross, these famous white buses that went around and picked up people in concentration camps. And I think, to me, this is one of the important things to remember and to learn from it. If you stand up as an individual or stand up as a group to terror and abuse and tyranny, the worst thing you can do is to turn around and run away. Stand up to them and challenge them. It's surprising how often it really works. And I have other stories to tell about friends of mine who went to prison or were examined. And here's a story I think I must tell. One of my very close friends was caught by Gestapo, went to jail, and was cross-examined for a week or 2 weeks. And they cross-examined him in German. He spoke German, of course, as we all do when we go to school in Denmark. So they brought him at one time a document saying, here's everything we have discussed, sign it. Henrik, my friend, said, I can't sign it. Why? But that's all we have discussed, and what is the matter with it? There are so many grammatical errors, spelling mistakes. I will not put my name to such a piece of trash. They let him go within 2 hours. This is what I mean, the type of a certain amount of humor can even emerge in these horrible situations. But above all, stand up against them. Refuse to accept it. Mind you, it's dangerous, and you may lose your life. And there were friends of mine who were executed, and I was a lucky one. I think I was very cautious. How did I get away with it? Because I should just say that after this Jewish horror, or the horror of the deportation of the Jews, I got, and we all got more and more involved in the resistance. And that was a strange thing, that was a tactical error, I think, on the part of the German authorities to think that they could get away with that, and forget that in itself sparked a very, very stubborn and courageous resistance to any military actions in the country. And so what was I saying? Well, then people say, what happened to you? Were you really involved? So they think maybe I wasn't involved so much. Well, I'm not going to brag about what I did, and I worked with people who were tough saboteurs and tough resistance people, much tougher than I. But I was very cautious. I transported weapons after the Jewish disaster. I transported weapons in my knapsack or in my bag. I had hand grenades and Sten guns and so on, and transported it from one place to another. And I helped train people in the use of these terrible weapons. And but I think I was very cautious. I talked to one of my friends the other day. He said, why did we not get caught? So he said, well, we were really very cautious, probably. We were not taking any chances. And I have several friends who took chances, and they lost their lives. So anyway, the one thing I think I would conclude with would be that for all of you and for all of us, not to forget what happens when you when you have this type of discrimination, this type of irresponsible terror, to stand up to it because every one of you will be surprised to see how effective it is to stand up as a single person. It does make a difference. We can't just hide ourselves, all of us, and say, oh, well, what can I do? After all, I vote the right way in the political campaign, but what else can I do? Well, I think we have to resist any type of abuse in any form, whatever and wherever it happens. So I think that's all.
I think your testimony, Dr. Möller, restores our faith in the human race. Given in man's inhumanity to man, when we hear a story like yours, it just puts things in a different perspective, in a much more optimistic perspective for us. And the floor is open for questions.
It's a true story.
Of course. Questions? Kai.
Have you since revisited Denmark?
Pardon?
Have you since revisited Denmark over the past few years, or since you left Denmark from the war, Second World War?
What did you say?
Have you been back to Denmark?
Oh yes, of course I have, and I love the country, even though they have some problems of their own. They are too insistent on the right to express your opinions, which I think is a bit foolish. But it's still a beautiful country. It is small. It has a very healthy economy. It has no national debt at all. It's the only country in the European community that has absolutely zero debt. They have no unemployment. They have a high standard of living. And they have what I think is, well, my wife also says that she has learned to speak Danish. She said, you know, there's this joie de vivre. The joy of life is still there in Denmark. They really like to live. They like good food, they like beautiful flowers, they like good music, and they work very hard. And if you take a rating of content internationally, you get a strange response that people in Denmark are about the most satisfied of all. So it's a nice country. They have beautiful literature and art and so on, which I teach at McGill and try to get people to come and study there. So anyway, it's they maintain a high standard of living.
Could you tell us what the population, the Jewish population of Denmark is today?
It's a bit more, but it's about between 8 and 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's any more particularly.
How many were sent to Theresienstadt?
460.
400. And they all came
And
back.
they
How many came back?
I think over 400. There was about, I think, 45 or 50 who died there.
And the Jewish community reconstituted itself in Copenhagen, Denmark?
Yeah, well, here's the thing I should say. The Jewish people who came back after they had fled to Sweden, all of them, including some of them here in Montreal, they say when we came back to our homes and apartments, we couldn't believe it. And they all say that the apartment was clean, the plants had been watered, there was fresh flowers in the vases.
Nothing had been stolen?
No, never. And the mortgages had been paid when they were, if they were a mortgaged house or something. So they were so touched by the sincerity of the seriousness that they took. You know, the lawns were cut in front of the house.
That's amazing.
Gabriel, too.
Do you think that you, yes,
I had a question.
yeah.
It seems an amazing fact that there was the key person who leaked the crucial information,
It's a German.
the German at the Trade Commissioner, is not well researched. Are we still a lot of mystery shrouded, or it would seem the ideal subject for somebody to do extensive research and to find out everything possible about his life, his motivation.
We know that there were not only Duckwitz, of course, he returned after the war to become the German ambassador to Denmark. It's interesting.
That's interesting.
So he survived, and I don't know of any research. There was some at one time rumor that Dr. Best knew and had given him permission to do it.
Like a wink, a quiet wink.
Yeah. But then Dr. Best was a strange person. He's sort of a double play. At one time he said, no Jewish person will be deported from here over my dead body. And other times he definitely is known to have asked permission from Hitler to execute the plan. There were other people in the German government. There was the Moltke family. They were also involved in stopping the whole action, and he actually was himself executed eventually. But so there were people in the German government in Berlin who realized that this was an impossible action to take, and it was very foolish and so on. But with Duckwitz, I only know that we always consider him a hero, and he certainly deserves a lot of credit for it. But I think he's passed away now. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I had heard that originally the Danish Jews were supposed to be sent to Auschwitz, but because of a very, very strong resistance of the Danish people, because by then the government had totally, it wasn't functioning, that the Germans compromised and in fact sent them to Theresienstadt, which was their model camp that they used to show. Is this accurate?
Yes, it is exactly that. I've heard the same thing now. I haven't seen the documentation to show it, but so that I've always emphasized the role of the deputy minister in Copenhagen, Svenningsen, and his insistence on getting reports and so on. But maybe the two go hand in hand. And maybe the reason why Gestapo responded was that they had orders to do so. I don't know. I mean, I haven't done any study of that myself. But, and as I said in the beginning, I'm just an ordinary person who was involved as a 25-year-old student, among many others. That's interesting. There probably is some truth to that.
I think what's remarkable about the story that you've just told us also is this collective response. Would your actions have been possible by individuals, for instance, in places, countries, regions where anti-Semitism was very strong? Where you'd know that your neighbor would denounce you if you helped out Jews, if you saved Jews, if you hid Jews?
Yeah. No, I mean, that didn't exist in Denmark because, as I said, expressed as it is in the official church, in the church, that it is illegal. Legally, it's illegal to be anti-Semitic.
So the tradition of tolerance helped foster that resistance.
Yeah. And there was no real anti-Semitism. It was very sporadic, very few crazy people who were exercised there.
I think it's remarkable also that it wasn't just one factor. And like you mentioned the church, you mentioned the king, he seemed to have a peculiar personality too that contributed. The general, so that I guess what we now call civil society had so many things going in favor of this being a difficult place for the Germans to pull off this kind of an activity. It makes it seem like a unique combination that doesn't reproduce itself in other societies enough. You think you kind of wish that we would have leadership these days in our modern Western countries who would have some kind of backbone and spunk to stand up to some things that can degenerate into horrors, but they go with the flow and they're reluctant and they talk out of two sides of the mouth to make sure they don't lose votes, and you sort of wish you had people who would stand up straight and tall, like examples came from Denmark in that period.
Yes,
I think the point has to be made that the German attitude toward the Danes was totally different from their attitude toward, let's say, either the French or on one side, or certainly the Slavic countries. They deemed the Danes younger brothers or cousins because they were of the same linguistic and blood stock. They were Aryans, and in fact, they needed the production, as you said, of their farms. So the attitude was somewhat, they somewhat tippy-toed around Denmark, whereas in other countries, they just, especially to the east, they just rolled over and didn't care what the population said. At least they took account of public opinion. They never did, strangely enough, Germany never declared war on Denmark, unlike the other countries. They just marched in one day saying, "Hi, we're here to protect you, our little brothers." So they were more sensitive to, and that's why what was one of the reasons that permitted the Danes to stand up to them a little bit.
They didn't give the Norwegians such a good deal. But the Norwegians resisted.
That's true.
And they fought back.
Yeah.
The Norwegians are tough. You see, the Norwegians are tougher than Danes.
It's colder up there.
There's more rock there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. We'll have a little bit of a break. Yes, so we'll have a little break and then we'll reconvene here in 15 minutes. This is a 3-hour class, so we almost have to punctuate it.